project, recording on progress. So I've listened. And thank you, Omi, thank you, Irish, thank you, Fabio, and Olaifa, that is also with us. I know that there are some more people on the Facebook that were interested in checking this profound and still not very dealt in our area, this spirituality. Even though we can do it without knowing what we are doing most of the time, but there is a lot to the dance and to this connection to the four elements. And we, as a dance group, as a dance association, we exist since 1996. So Batutia to Portugal, we work a lot with traditional African dances from several countries, mainly from South Africa, Angola, Congo, Conakry, Guinea-Conakry, Guinea-Bissau, Cape Verde, Brazil. And we are curious about it because we are from the whole of the diaspora from several African countries. Most of our elements are born here in Portugal. And we want to reconnect, recreate, and to share to our kids, our friends' kids, share to everyone some of the things that we didn't learn. So, Omi, thank you very much for being present, and I pass it to Irish.
Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for the introduction, Lino. This is an amazing project that Lino has put together, and I'm really, really happy and proud to be part of it. So the Afro-Atlantic online conversations and dialogue are part of a project that aims to create an intercultural connection between Afro-American experience through racism, activism, the arts, and education, and aims to inform, exchange, and inspire the Portuguese and Afro-descendant community in the context of the arts, inclusion, and education. Lino's already introduced the theme, and I would like to introduce to you, and actually perhaps I'll let our guest today introduce herself. Very, very happy to have present with us. She's part of, correct me if I'm wrong, but is it the Coalition of Diasporan Scholars Moving? I think is that, did I say the name correctly?
Exactly. Exactly.
And,
yes.
Yes, we're really, really happy to have you today. And this is, I'll let her introduce herself. This is Dr. Omi Davis-Smith.
Okay. Oh, what a wonderful welcome. Thank you so much. Super happy to be here today. And I know that there are folks out there that we don't necessarily see on the Zoom. So a grand welcome to everyone that we see and everyone that's there in spirit and everyone that's there in, you know, maybe we don't see you, but we know that you're there. So welcome and thank you. So thank you for taking the time to share in this discussion with us today. This is, I agree, this is a discussion that we don't get to have very often. And it's nice to create these spaces where we can talk about issues that are relevant to people of African and diaspora and people who are from Africa or who are a part of communities in the diaspora, you know, and I think that by creating those spaces, we are collectively creating some form of institutional and cultural change. So I applaud you guys for what you're doing. That's also a big part of the mission of the Coalition for Diaspora and Scholars Moving. So thank you. So I'm sending everyone greetings from Conakry, Guinea in West Africa, where I'm a Fulbright scholar focusing on two main activities. I am in apprenticeship with with Guinea's national dance company, Les Ballets Africains, where I'm conducting ethnographic research. And I am also filming a documentary about the company, their history, and the company's complicated relationship with the state. So I'm super happy to be here. I am a dance artist and ethnographer with a focus on the intersectionality of aesthetics, history, and politics in Francophone Africa. I earned a PhD in dance from Temple University with a specialization in the development of contemporary dance in Senegal, and an MFA in dance from Arizona State University with a focus on contemporary African dance techniques and thematic approaches to choreography. I've completed extensive professional dance training in Mali, Guinea, now Guinea, Senegal, and Nigeria, and I'm one of 16 people to receive certification in the practice and pedagogy of Germaine Acogny's modern African dance technique, which is the first codified contemporary dance technique of African origin. In addition, I am the owner of Omi Davis Co., which is a dance-based organization that organizes the Dance in Africa workshop in Senegal every summer. So now that we know each other a little bit better, I'm going to move on. At this point, I think that we can share my screen, and that way I can, I'm actually going to do this myself. That way I can share my PowerPoint here. Actually, let me see if I can pin. I'm going to try to pin myself because I saw this. Okay. Are you guys seeing my face now? Are you seeing this? Is all of this happening? Okay, great. So, I think that we did this.
Yeah.
Omi, are we good?
Now we need to see what's happening, because I put the pin on it, like you tell me, but we are with problems with the sharing screen. So
yes, I stopped the screen sharing to pin myself because I saw that my other connection was being lit up. So if you see my face now.
No, we are not seeing your face.
And you are.
Wait.
We're good now?
Wait, let me see if we are seeing, because.
Okay, good.
Wait just a second.
Okay, all right, so you can see my screen. Screen is visible now. Okay, very good. All right, thank you.
Yeah, we are seeing the sharing screen.
Okay, very good, wonderful. So now that we're good, and just stop me if like any of that changes, then we need to fix it. So when I think about how the Black body is viewed in dance, I realize that this is really a conversation about difference. It's about how the dominant caste of the world perceives difference, engages with difference, and demonizes difference. So to begin, I'm going to do a shameless plug here and share a short extract from the CDSM Coalition for Diaspora and Scholars Moving founder, Dr. Brenda Dixon Gottschall's performance lecture on the Black body in dance, because she sums it up very, very well, in my opinion. She states, and I quote, "In traditional European dance aesthetics, the torso must be held upright for correct classic form. The erect spine is the center, the hierarchical ruler from which all movement is generated. It functions as a single unit. The straight, uninflected torso indicates elegance or royalty and acts as the absolute monarch, dominating the dancing body. This vertically aligned spine is the first principle of European dance, with arm and leg movements emanating from and returning to it. The ballet canon is organized around this center. In fact, the structural principle is a microcosm of the post-Renaissance colonialist worldview. Like the straight centered spine of its dancing body, Europe posited itself as the center of the world, with everything else controlled and defined by it," end quote. With Dr. Brenda's help, I have just described two characteristics of ballet: verticality of the body and stabilization of the torso and pelvis. These are aesthetic characteristics associated with the one dance form unequivocally lauded as high art throughout the world. Now, the question of why ballet is at the top of an artificial, socially constructed hierarchy of dance forms, which is enforced and perpetuated across academic circles in dance academia, that's a whole nother discussion. And that's one that's related to our talk today, but we can't get into it at this time. But that being said, I point out these aesthetic characteristics of ballet and its connection to Euro-American and colonialist worldviews because of how radically they contrast with the Africanist aesthetic as it is understood by the dominant culture. While it's not possible to subsume all African dances under the same aesthetic description, because of course, all African dances are not the same, there are some characteristics that are shared across ethnic and linguistic groups. This Africanist aesthetic can be described as gliding, crouching, 45-degree waist bend, grounded nature, fast, slow, repetitive, participatory, isolation of muscle groups, vocal, embracing improvisation, embellishment upon the form. Several scholars have developed descriptive sets of shared characteristics of African dances. And here is one example, the 7 Senses of African Dances that was developed by our recently departed mother and dance scholar, Carrie-Ama Welsh. As a lifelong practitioner of African social and vernacular dance forms, I can attest, and as a former student of ballet, I can attest that the aesthetic qualities associated with both genres of dance are actually quite similar, although they are embodied in different ways. The verticality of the body and stabilization of the torso, normally attributed to ballet, are also central to the practice of many African dances, albeit with a starkly different visual impact than ballet. For example, Adumu, which is more commonly known as the, that jumping dance in Kenya, is performed by Maasai men when they compete for a wife. And this dance is built around the principle of rebound. The knees bend and propel the body into a jump that takes the dancer as high as possible while the upper body reaches vertically towards the sky. That is verticality. Stabilization of the core is also central to almost all African dances that require fast, decisive motion, quick directional changes, jumps, acrobatic movements, and traversing large spaces. But even though these aesthetic qualities exist in both African and European dance traditions, in Euro-American cultures, the ballet tradition is still believed to be superior to those of Africa. As a dance historian, I believe that if we look at cultural phenomena through a historical lens, we can better understand our current situation. What I aim to do today is offer some of the historical backdrop that informs how the Black body is perceived in dance. So the hierarchization of African and Diasporan dances and the stigmatization of the Black body in dance are mere consequences of the race-based caste system that positions the melanated body at its lowest rung. In other words, it's about the belief that Black bodies are inferior to white bodies. Under this thinking, Black dancing is inferior to white dancing, and it also follows that any kind of dancing, even ballet, that is embodied by a melanated body has less value than that which is embodied by a less melanated one. Note that my play on words is intentional. I'm over being called Black. I'm over calling dances of melanated descendants of Africa Black dance. I'm brown. We all are brown. Black folks ain't Black and white folks ain't white. We are a lovely spectrum of ivory to dark chocolate. And I believe in the power of our ability to change the language we use to describe who we are and what we do. But under the existing race-based caste system, those on the ivory end of the spectrum have historically been entitled to the rights and privileges denied to those who appear closer to chocolate. Inequities in value judgments ascribed to dancing bodies of difference stem from a long history of colonialist, white supremacist, and Eurocentric perspectives on the African body. And this will be a familiar, unfortunately, a familiar image to most of you. A Khoisan woman who we know of as Sarah Bartman, whose body was put on display in Europe because of her protruding buttocks and wide hips and some aspects of her genitalia that were unfamiliar to viewers in Europe. Colonial conquest of Africa provided some of the earliest writings that evidenced the formation of derogatory opinions on the African dancing body, steeped in xenophobia, the fear of difference. Across the sea, blackface minstrelsy in the US, Ireland, and the UK created and perpetuated certain tropes of performance aimed at denigrating the Black personality. The first full-length minstrel show, called Jim Crow, took place in the late 1820s and was an exaggerated reenactment of a crippled African-American enslaved man singing and dancing. The caricature portrayed a grotesque, shuffling, eccentric, awkward, loose-limbed, funny, rhythmic, and peculiar-looking melanated body in performance. Blackface minstrelsy consisted of whites performing racist perceptions of African Americans that in time would shape how melanated bodies would be represented on stage. These tropes of performance created generalized understandings of the Black personality. For example, minstrels danced and sang, so all people must dance and sing. All Black people must dance and sing. Blackface performers were funny, so all Black people were comedians. Minstrels wore dark makeup with grotesquely painted lips and horrible wigs, so all Blacks must resemble this image. This stereotype attached itself so firmly to white audiences in the United States that when Black minstrel troupes formed after the Civil War, African Americans blackened their faces, painted on red lips, and wore awful wigs to perform these same stereotypical tropes of Blackness. The reason I point out the colonialist impressions of dancing African bodies and Blackface minstrelsy is because of their long-reaching effects. These are the images that were set in place when dance modernists of African descent began to come into prominence from the 1930s on. And here I just have a little blurb about aesthetic modernism. We don't have to go into it much. Happy to discuss it later. But Black modernists or melanated modernists of whatever era tend to be concerned with challenging the ways in which the Black or the African, the diasporan body is presented in or is represented in the public sphere. There also tends to be a reclamation of Blackness or Africanness or Caribbeanness via the use of certain aesthetics. For example, and these are just a few, this list is by no means exhaustive. These are just a few Black modernists or melanated modernists who pushed back against the status quo. For example, Catherine Dunham infused her modern dance technique with ritual performance and the thematic content from Haitian and from dancers of Haiti and Martinique in the Dunham technique, and they are still with us today. Kariamu Welsh did tons of research in Zimbabwe and West Africa, even though she was born and raised in the United States. So here, even though most of these artists that I lived and worked in the United States, I did include a list here so that you can see some of their other regional affiliations, because all of that informs the ways in which these artists have pushed back and fought the ways in which our bodies were represented on stage, to aim to combat and change the ways in which our bodies are represented and perceived by within the public domain. And the reason, again, why a regional or some sort of cultural affiliation is important is because the minute you label someone as Black, you take away all of their cultural relevance. There's no ethnic affiliation. All you see is Black. You would see Asadata Dafara, who came from Sierra Leone and who worked in the 1930s, who came to prominence in the 1930s. You would see him in exactly the same way that you would see Dr. Kariamu Welsh, who was born and raised in the United States, even though they had two totally different cultural backgrounds. So in Africa and the diaspora, melanated modernists have endeavored to challenge how the African descended body was perceived and portrayed in concert dance. These are the images that we're still fighting up to this very day to change. And these are the stereotypical attitudes that still inform how the melanated body in dance is viewed today. For anybody who wants to believe that Blackface is a thing of the past, this here was 2020. This, 2019. That is supposed to be a sweater. Katy Perry shoes, anyone? So on the other side of revulsion and denigration lies negrophilia, whereby people with no visible connection to Africa or African or diasporan people endeavor to adopt some of the same characteristics attributed to Black bodies. Think about the appropriation of African and diasporan cultural forms, specifically in American concert dance and popular dance. Today, just take for instance, if you look on TikTok or YouTube, you'll see 1,000 videos with somewhere in the title, white girl does X Black dance, white girl does coupe décalé, Afrobeat, white girl does traditional African dance, without giving credit to the communities from which these dance forms emerge, or even background information on what these movements are. Historically, the appropriation of African American dances by white public figures has built the cultural fabric of our nation, from social jazz dances borrowed by Vernon and Irene Castle in the early 20th century to the codification of jazz dance that defined the professional dance scene during the latter half of the 20th century and continues to be taught in academic institutions today. And the codified form of jazz dancing was, of course, developed with the base of early African American dances. In the dance world today, we are still living and working under microaggressive and overtly racist environments, from clothing options and mandates, such as everybody wears the pink tights and shoes, regardless of skin tone, to the belief that African dances are devoid of technique. As so aptly described in the well-known article by Raquel Monroe, I don't want to do African dance without my dance technique. And just for fun, I did a Google search here, looking for ballet tights. Not that I need them now, because I don't, but this is interesting to note. First page, I said, let's look at the second page. Okay, pink, white, black as in, you know, like charcoal black, like intentionally black, but nothing brown on there, nothing melanated. Even though several developed nations are in the midst of a grand reckoning of our attitudes about race, specifically in the United States due to ongoing race-based police brutality, ballet is still seen as both the foundation and the goal of dance technique. And ballet, obviously, is still overly represented as white. Many prominent African American dance companies have even gone through a process of whitewashing, whereby they consistently wash the Africanist aesthetic out of their repertoire of dances until they reach a rigid torso, vertical spine, and perfect extensions associated with the ballet aesthetic. So even though those of us who know that there is so much to gain from the rich movement vocabularies and aesthetics offered by African and Diasporan forms, some still prefer to embody the characteristics of so-called high art. Here is my reminder to pop in to the chat box the reading list that was prepared by myself and the members of the Coalition for Diasporan Scholars Moving. This is in no way a definitive list. It is just a start for people who would like to think more deeply on some of the things that I've discussed here. And it's not going in, but that's okay. I'll pop it. It won't copy and paste, but I'll work on that and make sure I do that before we end this call. Now I'm checking my time. Okay, so for the next few minutes here, I am just going to direct my commentary to a related topic that was also requested by the panel, by the organization, Spirituality in African Dances. And that may be something that seems to be entirely unrelated to the conversation that the commentary that I've just given. But it's actually quite simple because the, African spirituality is not well understood in community dance and academic circles in the United States. And I have a hunch that it may not be well understood there in Portugal as well. We've been inundated by all these images via television, movies, Christian rhetoric about voodoo, hoodoo, santeria, and all of these usually sensationalized practices or beliefs about what African spirituality is about that's based on and perpetuate the same negative stereotypes about Africa, its people, and its diaspora. So we're really talking about the same, it's two sides of the same coin. The stigmatization of African spiritual practices is connected to the same attitudes about difference that devalues cultural forms of African diasporan origin. So the thing that's important to understand about spirituality within African-based movement forms is that they come from a culture and a worldview. Dance in Africa does not exist in a vacuum. Dance in Africa animates cultural values and beliefs in which energy and life force are central elements. So spiritual beliefs within African-based movement forms are central to ritual performance on the one hand, social and vernacular dances, that's another body of movement or movement practices, and even some contemporary dance expressions centralized spirituality. So for example, on the ritual performance side, there's a belief in spirit mediumship. For example, the Yorubas of southwestern Nigeria are the originators of the Isheshe belief system, which is the indigenous spiritual philosophy of the Yoruba people. Within Isheshe, there's a belief that spiritual entities can displace a human being's own spirit, occupying the body and controlling its behavior. Dancing during ritual events or even community events is at times central to this practice. Social and vernacular dances, which are not the same as ritual performance, these are the dances that are represented by what we learn in Europe and the United States. You go to take an African dance class, those are social vernacular, those are choreographed representations of social and vernacular dance forms. They embody spirituality because they stem from worldviews where spirituality is central. So for example, some dances require the waist to bend at a 45-degree angle, which brings the upper body and the chest closer to the ground. The ground is where our ancestors are buried. So that can symbolize communicating with our ancestral spirits through movement. Other dances may require stomping or tapping on the ground. That can also be used to symbolize, or invoking the attention of our ancestors, calling on our ancestors. Not in all the dances, but these are possibilities. Some examples are the Bambara's Sogonikun, which has a very deeply spiritual significance, and the Lebu's Nep dance form. And that's, yes, so that takes care of the difference between ritual performance and the social and vernacular dance forms. Because oftentimes people have that fear that, oh, this is some ritual thing, or this is some spiritual thing. I'm Christian, or, I can't, we've been so inundated by all of this misinformation, but there is a difference there, and it needs to be made very clear. Lastly, I'll just comment on one contemporary African dance technique created by Germaine Acogny that centralizes very much the concept of spirituality. Central to indigenous African spiritual beliefs is the understanding that life exists in nature and that we can communicate with this life force and engage with it. The cosmos, plants, the earth, trees, animals, animate and inanimate objects, they're all teeming with the vital force or life energy. The Acogny technique includes a moment, it requires a moment of communion with energy, the energy of nature, before any dancing happens. And this is called taking the energy. So that is all I'm gonna do as far as my rambling session here. I think this is a good moment to open up our conversation, to make it an actual conversation at this point. I'm eager to hear any comments or take any questions that you all may have.
Well, first, thank you so much for such a rich presentation, and at the same time quite touching, actually. Yes, I've read so much stuff that you've presented, but when you still see it presented, it still touches a part of your heart, as an artist, as a person, and our journeys here to actually see it said, truly. So thank you for that. Really, really, truly appreciated what your presentation was about. And I think there's so much to unpick because it was so rich. So I'm gonna start, I think, if that's okay, by your last some of your last presentations, because I haven't had an opportunity to go to L'École des Sables yet. It was planned for us to go last year, and we didn't manage to, of course, with all of the world crisis. But I wanted to ask you that, and it might be come close a little bit to the question that was put to you from our director, Giselle Lino. We might want to intervene, I don't know. But I wanted to find out a little bit more about how did that feel at L'École des Sables in Senegal? Because I know there's so many practitioners that go there that are not just of African descent, but also European. And they come to immerse themselves and to train the contemporary African dance technique with Mama Acogny. And I just wanted to find out, is that a little bit connecting to that question, how did it feel for them? Were you able to make any of those observations? Because I think at a basic level, it's just human, in fact, to connect to the elements, but at the same time that has been demonized, as you said right at the beginning of the presentation, so much that it's almost as if it's new. Of course, it's not, it's holistic, but how did you have any observations on that when you attend and you see people that are of European descent? How does it feel for them? What is their reaction, perhaps, when they experience that?
That's an excellent question. And yeah, you are a sister Sablis. So, you know, all of us who come through Echo de Sab, we're Sablis when we leave. So it's actually a really wonderful network that always seems to come back around, which underscores just the major impact that Germaine Acogny has in founding her school. And you know, Echo de Sab, for any of you who are not aware, is the primary school for professional dance training in West Africa. There are others. There's a university in Ghana, I've been told, where folks can study dance on a professional level. But people come from all over the world, and certainly all over Africa, but also all over the world to study at École de Sab. And there's a reason. There's a level of rigor. There's a level of a level of quality that you get when you come through that school. It's a place where no justification is needed to talk about, to say the words African and contemporary in the same sentence. It's a place where, you know, you don't have to beg to have a seat at the table to be an artist who works in both social and vernacular forms and those that are made for the concert stage. It's understood and it's encouraged, and it's a place for creativity. So I was made there, you know, I was literally made as an artist there. It changed my entire, so much about my approach to not only choreography, you know, I mean, I got a lot out of my Master of Fine Arts program, but I got more out of being at École de Sab for 4 different extended workshops. That being said, I can't speak to how our white or European descended counterparts may have perceived their experiences at École de Sab. But what I can say is that, and this is something that I think about as well with my own workshop, Dance in Africa workshop, for those of us who are of African descent, by and large, I can speak on all of our behalf because I know that this is something true. When we say we want to come to Africa, I want to come to Africa. It's usually some form of connecting to our heritage, our ancestral heritage informs that decision. Even if we're going for work, even if we're going to study dance, that feeling of being, especially your first time, being on the continent, knowing that because being African American and living in such a racially motivated society, it's almost as though because Black, being marked as Black, washes the body of all of this ethnic and cultural history. All that's seen as phenotype, kinky hair, you know, wide nose, big lips, you know, big butt, brown skin. It's almost as though for many of us, there's no real evidence that we are African. You see, like we have it in our title, African American, but our history as a people was washed away, you know, because of poor record keeping during the period of enslavement. We cannot trace our ancestors all the way back with a piece of paper. We can't say, according to this genealogy report, my ancestors come from this Wolof speaking community in Senegal or Mauritania, you understand? So for us being there, it already does a thing, right? And the being in nature, it's, I think, a part of that, even though for some people it may sort of reinforce these ideas about primitive Africa or primitive Africans living in nature, I think that's something that we stop at because there is something about being in Africa, in nature, dancing, and feeling a sense of freedom, aesthetic freedom, That's something that is empowering to us as a people. What I can also say is that with regard to our European descended counterparts, I've never seen any negative, you know what, let me take that back because I'm about to tell a lie. I'm about to tell a lie on Sunday. I'm gonna say 95% of the time, because I've had some interactions now. You know, I don't have a problem saying what needs to be said. We can have an honest conversation if we can all admit, you know, we can all talk about the elephants in the room. Everybody can be honest. We can have a great time and come back tomorrow, you know. 95% of the time, I've not seen anything but positive energy, openness, and just a real desire to be a part of and share on both sides, on all sides. And that's been a joy to experience. But also keep in mind that the focus of École des Sables, of a lot of the workshops, not all of the workshops, but the focus of many of the classes that I taught there is Germaine Acogny's technique. And that is a contemporary dance technique that's informed by African dances and African indigenous worldview. But by it being contemporary, it invokes universality, right? So it is designed to be taught.
Actually, I have a feeling, sorry to interrupt you, but
exactly.
I was going to say that's forgotten a lot. Because
no, it's fine.
The moment that they mention Senegal, that's it. Nobody's actually thinking contemporary. Somehow the contemporary word gets lost very quickly in the conversation. And it goes back to this idea yet again that anytime that you talk about African dances, it has to be something that is kind of staying in the past somehow and traditional, and there's no contemporality about it. So that's lost very quickly, I've got to say. So sorry to interrupt.
No, it's fine. And I mean, you're absolutely right, because that's something that, you know, people think about this idea of being modern, right? The reality is, when people think about, how can I say this in a very nice academic way? You know, you think about things being modern, you think about it being close or mimicry of Europe, mimicry of European culture. The closer a society is to the European ideal.
Well, that's the world model, isn't it? That's the world model.
There it is. Exactly. That's the closer these societies appear to be to the European ideal, the more modern they're perceived to be. But that's a misunderstanding to what modernity is. Modernity is about cultural change that happens from a period of sustained intercultural contact. That being said, African communities have always been modern. They have always changed and adapted and adopted other cultural practices, because there's always been intercultural exchange. That is what modernity, that's what modernity, being modern is about. So yes, you're absolutely right. And those are, again, these are fighting, right? You know, and the question is, you know, how do we do that? But I think that we just have to keep having conversations like this.
And I'm going to link to the question that our director, Lena, kind of posed. So how can we recreate or like incorporating this, like how can we make this space for creation or creativity as the dances that have a connection to our ancestral and spiritual peoples, with rules and principles that can they be shared with European people that are not initiated? Does it matter?
Yes, I have two things to say on that. I think that because let me say this. I have spent the majority of my professional career teaching people that have no visible connection to Africa. I spent the majority of my professional career teaching African or African-derived dances to people who are not melanated. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about that kind of thing, you know. But there's a couple things that I think we can do. On the one hand, there's a whole lot that can be shared. If you're talking about, say, for instance, I have a colleague that teaches Orisha dancing, and the Orisha dance tradition, just like any other dance tradition that comes out of a sort of ritual performance background or a spiritual background, New York City, there are going to be some differences in how it's embodied.
Let's see. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, I'm going to continue talking while I call Zoom back. Zoom kicked me off. That's okay. We still friends. I'm not mad.
Welcome to Zoom.
Okay.
Enter your meeting
Just give me a
ID
second to do
followed by-
this.
No worries. We're really enjoying our conversation here, guys. For those who are just not, coming in now, we are here with Dr. Omi Davis-Smith from Diaspora Coalition of Scholars Moving, and we're talking about the Black body aesthetic in dance and spirituality in dance and African dances. So I think we are connecting back again. It was just a few seconds, so you haven't lost, well, unless you've lost the whole beginning. You can always catch up with us, but I think we've got Dr. Omi back, and I can give the word back to her.
Yeah, it's just the multitasking thing. Like I have to type in all these numbers.
Enter your participant.
Okay, I think I'm back on.
You entered 460.
Uh-oh. I'm going to continue speaking with the Zoom because it's not accepting the meeting password. So keep going. As long as you guys can hear me okay, we're going to keep chatting. So the thing is, even when we're sharing information or movement practices that come from a spiritual background, there's a lot that can be shared, such as symbolism, right? When we're teaching dance, right? Because we're not in here trying to initiate people. We're not in here trying to call down some spiritual entity to embody, to displace our spirits and send us all into trance. There's a place and time for everything, right? But we can share symbolism. If we are teaching dance, we're not only focusing on the aesthetics, but we can talk about why the aesthetics are what they are. So say, for instance, if those who are coming from a Santeria background, Lukumi background, if they're teaching a dance about Shango, which is one of the most popular deities in their pantheon, then those instructors can explain why the body moves the way that it does, because in their pantheon, Shango is a king. So there's a lot of majestic movement. There's some athletic movement. There are things that come out of these stories that are part of that spiritual tradition that are then animated by the movements that we share as a part of that dance tradition. That's totally fine. I think that it's also it's a choice that we have to make. You understand? There are things that I think that there's a place for us to create where we choose to only share certain information with melanated bodies. You understand? Because these come from our cultures, from our traditions. There's nothing wrong with saying, I teach these things to people who look like me, because we need to have something of our own, and we don't have a space to enact on our own cultural practices in this particular community, in Portugal, in the United States, in Richmond, Virginia. It's okay to create those spaces for ourselves. But it's, when it comes to sharing information that is, we're offering it to the community at large, I think we get to make those choices. And I think that there's nothing wrong with that. For me, I focus on the aesthetics, I focus on the bodily techniques, and I focus on helping people understand the context and the story behind the dance. And that's fine. That's fine all across. At least I'm comfortable with that, if that makes any sense. But everybody has to kind of make that choice for themselves, because, yeah, we have to also create spaces for our own, in our own spaces and our own safe spaces.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think to me, it's been amazing to see in the last 20 years the openness into this African spirituality, and definitely in dance. I think actually the dancers of the Lukumi and that they really helped, of course, because the Cuban diaspora around Europe, Italy mainly, but also England and in the UK, this where
Right.
from,
Right.
have really kind of helped people to kind of see something else and
I'm
something
frozen.
different.
I'm still here if anyone can see me.
I can hear you, but that's fine, you know. And do you think that is this is also due to the fact that people are a little bit more open and more holistic now, since with all these new alternative therapies, yoga, things that we're chanting in script and stuff when we are in class and burning incense everywhere? Do you think because of this that the African spirituality is now more accepted, or is it something else? Is it that people are more? I'm actually interested, because from my experience in teaching, I haven't. Oh, yeah, I'm doing a little echo. I haven't always felt that. Let's just say, and whereby before I would be questioned if I was to walk the room before my class and, you know, just burn a little bit of incense or just breathe before I start the class. Now I'm not questioned as much if I'm integrating those practices in class. Something like this, something very simple. We're not even going into any sort of storytelling about, you know, gestures or how some movements are connecting more to the ground or whatnot, you know, but just something as simple as this. Do you think it's because the other things that are accepted now are also then opening the way for African spirituality to be more accepted, or is just a natural way of things evolving and knowledge evolving in terms of a collective knowledge?
I would like to, can you guys hear me okay, by the way? Okay, because I called back in. You know, I would like to believe that, like you said, which I think was, you know, so aptly put, this collective, you know, evolution or the collective growth, you know, and change in our mindset. I would love to believe that that's the case. I think maybe there's a little bit of that, right? I think, like, if I want to be really optimistic, I could say that. But yeah, I can't really say that that's the case, you know, because you got to remember, you know, there's this distinction between otherness and universality, you know, something that is made universal, universally accessible, right? So if you think about, I mean, that's an excellent point. I mean, that's like, that's fruit to chew on, you know, for later. Like, you know, you need to write an article and publish about that, you know, because you know, if you think about yoga is something that comes from it's a spiritual tradition. The asanas, the physical movements, are one branch of several that make up an actual spiritual tradition that is ancient, that comes from a culture, that comes from you, that embodies and animates values that come out of a particular worldview. I'm not an expert on yoga, but I at least understand that much. But yoga, as we know it in first world nations, has been so standardized. You know, when things are standardized, standardization strips the culture, it strips the perceived otherness away. Because in order to make it universally accessible, there has to be, you know, a level of legibility. You understand? So referring to downward facing dog in the, you know, in English, saying downward facing dog versus, I don't even know the actual name of that asana, you know?
Yeah, I actually don't.
And I want to know.
I actually don't know.
Right.
And actually, it's really interesting that you just mentioned that, because I've just recently spoken to a practitioner that teaches Orisha dances and stuff, and it's a very interesting conversation. And one of the things that he's actually telling me, he said, "Oh, Iris, the moment I've been practicing for so many years, I've done this, done that, etc." And then he said, the moment I put forward a project that did not have an African sounding name, it got accepted. The funding got accepted, and it can't be a coincidence. It can't be a coincidence, of course. So
yeah, no, it's not a coincidence. I mean, there's this perceived otherness, right? So, and again, it comes from this very long history, you know, that we've already talked about. But the perception of otherness also sort of suggests, I think, that there's an inside and an outside, right? So I'm on the outside, and I'm very curious to see what's on the inside, on the inside of this community practice, you know, of this practice that's coming from this particular culture. But things like language and name and all of these things that pad the actual form, for me, being on the outside looking in, I read them as, you know, and I'm not saying me personally, but, you know, me as a United sort of person, I see that as a barrier to my entry. So in order to make these things universally applicable, we have to whitewash all of these things down. We have to strip it down, strip it of its cultural context in order to make it universally accessible. Now, because yoga has gone through that process so much in our countries, yeah, sure, you've got people of every hue, people of every racial background or ethnic background are going and getting their yoga certification and improving their lives and improving the lives of other people. And it's great, you know, what's happening, but that should not be confused as the actual true yoga practice that you would go and apprentice in if you had, you know, if you came from that culture or what have you. Now, the other thing you got to keep in mind is India, although India, the landmass that is India, was once a part of the landmass that is Africa, India ain't Africa. And India is not read the same way as Africa. If you think about that hierarchy, that race-based caste system, India, look, don't get me wrong, they're close to the bottom now, but Africa is at the bottom, you understand? So it's almost as though within that race-based caste system, those who are higher up perceived to be higher up on the value system, you know, or are ascribed, their communities are ascribed more value than ours. They are less melanated. It's almost as though they had to justify or open the door for you to be able to come in, you know, and burn your incense or your frankincense before you start, you know, or teach a song in a language that they don't understand, you know, which they won't understand, you know, because it's not part of the culture. Right? It's almost as though those have to validate the practices that we do so that our practices can be more accepted. I hope that that was clear. And I hope that I said that in a way that does not offend anyone, because I don't intend to offend anyone. But I do believe in talking about what's in front of my face. I'm gonna do that every single time because we don't have to apologize for that.
No, I really thank you for your directiveness. I think these are difficult conversations, or delicate conversations, let's say, or conversations that people don't really want to talk about or are scared of talking about it. Perhaps if they don't have the right
they're uncomfortable
background, they're uncomfortable. You know, we grew up not talking about them. In fact, I grew up in my culture, we grew up being told not to talk about these things. So we're doing a lot of catch up, I guess, here, you know, and in Portugal, Afro-descendants are doing a lot of, you know, have a lot of catching up to do, which is why these conversations are very, very important, why this program of the Afro-Atlantic is really, really important. But yeah, what I also wanted to do, if that's okay with you, because I mean, this is very exciting, but just to take a little step back, because I know you gave us a very rich presentation, but you know, also I wanted to find out a little bit more about, you know, how you got involved in learning and teaching African dances in the USA, and what led you to pursue a more academic route while training in African dances, because in fact, obviously gave you so many tools, you know, and the route that you've pursued have actually empowered you to understand a lot more than just dancing steps. So I'd like to, if you could share with us a little bit. I know we have your lovely biography with us, but it would be interesting to know, because also that's another thing that living in the diaspora also, we've also been conditioned to not be that connected. We're not that motivated often to put our kids and our children into dance class, an African dance class, or sort of African dance, diasporan dance programs. And there's various reasons for that, okay? But I'd like to understand how did you is that happen in the US? And how did you got motivated to get involved in learning and pursuing like a more academic route as well?
You know, it's pardon. It's interesting that you mentioned that because yeah, I mean, I'm sure others could probably describe their experiences in a way that aligns a lot more with your own. For me, I just fell in love early. You know, I started with, you know, modern dance, and I didn't come into dance until I was already, you know, 13, 14 years old. So I didn't come up through the studio culture, which saved my life. To be honest with you, you know, because yeah, I was able to escape a lot of the let me say that I would have been a stronger dancer earlier had I come up through those years of studio-based training when I was a child. But I also would have inherited, I think, some limitations that would have, you know, I would have had to overcome as an, you know, within my own work in African dances. I started with modern, but I went to a college prep high school, and I was required to take a college dance class. So I took what seemed to be an EVA, Afro-Caribbean dance, at Virginia Commonwealth University, which is where I did my undergrad. I ended up being the first graduate in African American Studies from Virginia Commonwealth University with a bachelor's in AFAM Studies. But it started with that class. That course was taught by our also recently departed Sister Faye Walker, who taught that course for 20 years as an adjunct instructor. The class is huge, like 50 students every semester. I fell in love. I just fell in love, you know. And I could feel myself inside those movements.
Oh, nice. Do you there's still this idea, and so let's go back to that, because following what you're just saying.
Well, actually, can I want to finish answering this question before we go to the other one. Yeah, because that was just the beginning for me. I joined an African dance company shortly after and stuck with it for 8 years, but moving into the academic route, that inspiration came because I knew by that time, 8 years into a professional dance life with African dance company was amazing. But I got to the point where I felt that there had to be much more that I was not getting. Because when we learn African dances in the United States, we are learning choreographed representations of social and vernacular dances that happen here in Africa, but they're happening as a function of social events. There's a wedding, so we're going to dance Babar. You know, okay, here in Guinea, in Malinke communities, there is, you know, somebody's having a wedding, we're going to have a Dembadon, you know, which is very different from a Dudumba, you know, but both happen as a part of weddings. You understand? I wanted to get that. So I went back to school to study dance from an academic standpoint because I wanted to study dance in Africa. And then later, you know, through my teaching and my experiences, I wanted to not only be able to theorize and understand from a historical perspective, you know, what was going on with these dance forms, but also to be able to share that information as well. So that's the long answer to a short question. You know, I just knew that there had to be more, and I wanted to study dance in Africa.
Well, I'm glad that you had that curiosity. Now we have you here. You know, I'm really excited to hear you. It's really beautiful to listen, and that leads me, you know, to different things. But that, you know, I've got to put this forward because we still hear this, and we still definitely hear this in Portugal, but even in the UK. We hear this a lot, and there's still this idea that one does not need to train formally in order to develop African dances expertise. I know there's a couple of things to unpick from there, but what is for you like the importance of having a certain pedagogy in African dance? Did your understanding of like having a certain pedagogy and aesthetic of African dances change the way you viewed African dances as a whole, and like specifically?
So I'll just address one part of the question, and then you can push me forward or And also, like, if there are other people that have things to add, you know, or personal experiences they want to share, like, please feel free to take part in the conversation as well, because y'all gonna get tired of hearing me talk soon. I'm telling you, you can be like, can I want to say something, and I invite you to do that, you know. But so, like, for me, there's two things with that. I think on the one hand, we have to problematize this idea of dance technique, right? And how dance technique is acquired. I think that I agree with you that is absolutely an erroneous assumption, this idea that there's no technique in African dances, or that you don't have to train formally in order to, you know, master the bodily techniques that are found in one dance or another. I think that is just, you know, again, a consequence of the derogatory way that, you know, dances of African and Diaspora are positioned and viewed by the dominant caste. And that's something that we fight against every day. But when you think about what technique aims to accomplish, technique is the body, you know, learning to master or operate in, you know, to adapt certain bodily, certain bodily techniques, certain principles of movement. It's like riding a bike. You know, there's a technique to riding a bike, but, you know, and you have to do it in order to master it, in order to understand how to do it. And every time you get back on that bike, your body is going to remember. You know, that's what technique aims to accomplish. It's socially cultivated behavior. It's something that we are cultivating. It's something that is acculturated. You know, how do we get that? We get that through exposure. We get that through practice. We get that through a deliberate, repetitive activity, repeated activity, i.e. I'm going to a dance studio and I'm training in this dance form. But when you think about talking about social and vernacular dances, there are so many people, the majority of the people who come from these forms are learning them in time and space with their feet on the ground. And by that, I mean, I'm a part of this community. Every time we go to a wedding, we dance this dance. So I absorb that and I embody that. I do what I see. It's like, you know, I'm African American from the South. We do the electric slide. A group doing the electric slide at every cookout. You know, and for us, a cookout is like, as some people call it, a barbecue or what have you. We get together, we cook outside, we play music, we dance. We've always danced the electric slide. You can't tell me I don't know the electric slide. That's part of my culture. It's part of who I am. But I can also teach it because I've learned how to teach. You understand? So there's a difference between how we acquire technique, right? We don't have to, how do I say, go through a training program or come up through years of studio-based education or get a degree to say, you know, I have mastered this dance technique. You can acquire dance techniques in different ways when you're talking about social and vernacular dance forms. We are probably, those of us who are in Euro-American cultures, we probably are the most studio-based centric, or how to say, we're the only ones that think that we can only learn how to dance if we go to a dance studio or go through a dance program. Everybody else in the world is doing it in time and space. But that being said, there is value to, if you're coming from outside of these cultures, there is a great value to coming through some sort of program that's going to help you not only embody the techniques, the physical techniques, but develop an ethical perspective through which to understand and learn these forms. That's the piece that's missing from a lot of the dance education that, and I know I just popped out, it'll bring my face back in, but I'm gonna keep talking. That's the piece that is missing from the majority of these, you know, so-called, you know, dance studios or dance programs or what have you. It's not enough just to learn the movement. We got to know how to see, how to attempt to learn through an ethical perspective.
Absolutely. I love what you just said at the end. Yeah, that's definitely the missing piece in a lot of dance programs, and actually not just African diasporic dance programs, but I think dance programs overall are generally missing this key part, in fact. But before we go into some other questions about spirituality as well, I just wanted for you to tell us a little bit of what you've been developing. I mean, without obviously, you know, tell all, because I know you're writing a book and it's special. So guys, those who are listening out, please make a note. what's going on. Make a note of the name here of Dr. Omi Davis-Smith, because Omi Davis-Smith, because she's going to come out with something very, very interesting in hopefully a year or two or so. So let's see. She doesn't want to put a date on it because these things sometimes change. So let's not be too strict. But I would like to ask her a little bit about, she can tell us a little bit about Adewa theory, which is something that she's been researching and writing about. And to ask please if you can share that a little bit with us, that would be lovely.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for that. And thank you for the grace you've just given me, and reminded myself to give myself a little bit of grace too. We give everybody else so much grace and understanding, but we push ourselves like, you got to get it done. So our dot theory, and I'm gonna just type that in the chat box here because it is a word that it is a Yoruba language composition. I won't talk about the etymology of the word itself because that's a very long discussion, but and that's actually, let me see, and Germaine Acogny, that is the Germaine Sydney. And Germaine Acogny, that's the first part of the title, the working title. So the owl dot theory, I'll backtrack a little bit. When I was doing my doctoral studies, I found that in order to talk about contemporary dance, the development of contemporary dance in Senegal, I was unable to find a theoretical framing that would help me understand the connections between history and politics and cultural values and aesthetics. There are, as I mentioned, descriptive sets that can help us understand what's going on within African social and vernacular dances, i.e. traditional-based dances or traditional dance, right, in Africa. And there have been many commentaries on that. There have been also these attempts to classify and categorize an Africanist aesthetic, which Dr. Brenda Dixon Gottschalk has contributed greatly to. And we've been able to understand a lot, from these really important efforts, and sometimes they were really like the first major efforts in terms of African dance research. But when you're talking about contemporary dance, you're talking about concert dance forms that are, they are not so-called traditional dance. They're not social and vernacular dance forms. These are concert dance forms. And I had to create what I couldn't find because I couldn't use, Black dance, theories or perspectives on Black dance to talk about dance that was happening in West Africa. Those are apples and oranges. In the United States, in the Caribbean, in South America, Central America, in the United States specifically, in North America specifically, we had to grapple with the legacy of enslavement, Jim Crow in the United States. In Africa, in the Caribbean, South America, Central America, there was a legacy of colonialism. Those are related, but they are not the same. So what I did was I reached across disciplines. I did a lot of reading in art history, African art history, did a lot of reading in Afrikaner Philosophy. And those things really helped me to understand that there are already indigenous African philosophies that are basically what we in dance studies call embodiment. Their perspectives on embodiment. Embodiment in dance studies talks about, broadly speaking, right? Because it has its own trajectory and its own history and development in dance studies. But broadly speaking, embodiment is generally used in this discipline to describe the ways in which we wear our culture and our movements, right? The ways in which our cultures create our movements, the ways in which our cultures inform our movements, our bodily behaviors, our dance practices, but also there's some small, there's like a caveat in there that says, oh, well, the body also speaks back to culture. The body also changes culture. And within African indigenous philosophies, there are concepts like Seselelame that comes from the Ano-Ewe people. There are concepts like Ubuntu that is well known, that comes from, you know, Bantu peoples, the Bantu people, that talk about not only communalism, but they're much broader than just, you know, the ways in which our cultures shape our bodily behaviors. There's culture shaping our behavior, but there's so much room there. There's so much space for creativity. It's like it's an obligatory part of you know, like there's this give and take. I don't know if I'm using the right words to describe this, but what I'm saying is there are already philosophies that exist here on the ground that I was able to then assemble and put in conversation with each other to create a framework through which I could understand the Acogny technique. The Awoda theory is not specifically for the Germaine Acogny technique. It's not specifically for contemporary dance. The Awoda theory can be used to unpack the role of history, politics, cultural values, aesthetics, personal agency, artistic vision, the ways in which all of those things meet and are embodied within a particular dance form of African and diasporan origin. So if we want to talk about, you know, Orisha dance in Cuba or Orisha dance in New York City, if we want to talk about Jamaican dance hall, you know, if we want to talk about, you know, dances that are happening at a Dimbadon here in Conakry, Guinea, we can look at the Awoda framework as a theoretical guide and as an organization, not an organization, as a theoretical guide and as it's a paradigm through which we can look and say, okay, each of these pieces, history, politics, cultural values, aesthetics, aesthetic structure, aesthetic values, and the artist's own desire to transform acculturated bodily behavior, all of these things come together and are embodied within these forms. And we can depend on and use many of these existing philosophies to help us understand from a culturally relevant perspective what's going on in these movement forms. Because oftentimes if we're using, say for instance, we wouldn't use Afrocentricity, which is one of the seminal theoretical frameworks that we have used in you know, African American studies, cultural studies, and I'm thinking even in dance studies, Afrikaner studies, Afrikaner philosophy, to help us understand cultural phenomena within an African American space, right? I would use Afrocentricity to help me understand social dynamics between men who are incarcerated at a particular, you know, prison facility. I could do that because that theory was created to help us understand just that. It's contextually relevant. I could not use Afrocentricity to help me understand what's going on in Africa.
Right.
So that is, for me, the value of, you know, I'm biased, of course, because I did the research myself. But for me, you know, that's the value, and it's really what motivates me to continue to move forward on this journey with Awoda, because it is it's still developing, you know.
No, absolutely.
But I want to reach back for those who are coming behind me who are saying, well, I want to study this or I want to understand that, you know. But I don't even know where to start. Like, this is a place to start, you know.
No,
and I hope that will be able to be a service for others. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sure it will. I'm pretty sure it will. And I'll really look forward to that publication when you finish that work. Well, she's never finished.
Me too, sis. Me too.
I'm really looking forward to it. But I'm going to touch on what you said, because you said something very, very important, and you mentioned it a few times, of course. And you talked about Afrikaner philosophy. And again, that's not really something that people hear often. Afrikaner philosophy, what is that? I mean, recently I think we exchanged this before when we first did the test. I had my daughter, at school, she had a project where she put a lot of writers together. And in all of those writers, and some of them are philosophers. Of course, there was only one that she managed to put there. It was of African Caribbean background, Germaine. But I doubted very, very much that even myself, I have quite a lot of difficulty to actually find literature that would be considered Afrikaner philosophy. You see what I mean in terms of these ideas. Where can we find that? Because one of the things that is quite difficult as well in the Afro-descendant community in Portugal is to find material and find resources that are perhaps translated into Portuguese, even though there's a very, very high community of Afro-descendants here. I mean, perhaps our director, Joselino, can even give us some numbers when he's ready, but I know there's obviously quite big in Portugal, but there's just not a lot of access to this material. And I'm wondering if perhaps within that, there could be this bridge of dialogue could be maintained and pursued a little bit further into creating material and resources that are actually translated into Portuguese about these things. One of the things that was put here in the
I would just say that I would actually say that if you were able to access, especially if you are a part of an educational institution like a college or university, there should be some parameters where you can search for things, for resources in English, right, outside of the language, the primary language of that particular region. And if you're able to do that, and if you find things that are interesting, if you're able, I'm not assuming that everybody speaks English, so I know that the language is a major, major barrier. But if there is some level of understanding or familiarity, and you find a title, I would say contact the publisher, contact the publisher so that they can then contact the author and see if that, if a translation might be available. And I'm sorry for that. I wish that I know that my video is coming back on, but I wish that that wasn't such a, that the language barrier wasn't such a barrier to access for people. And hope
that's actually a great tip. That's actually a great tip. Perhaps in the future, Batotia too can pursue some of these ideas. Actually, that's a great tip. Batotia too is doing really great work here as well, because they are working with a couple of universities and one university writer as well, and it has helped publish some books regarding some of the research here in terms of the Black presence in Lisbon. And that's been an amazing work in the last few years, actually led by our director, Joselino. He had some questions here as well about if you have any examples in terms of learning and promotion of African spirituality within the African American community. Are there any examples of areas of Santeria or of Haiti? I know there's some, but I don't know what the extent of these spaces exist in African American culture.
I don't think that I've understood the question as well as I would like to. Can you repeat? Are you asking if there are? If you can just repeat.
I'll repeat, because I'm reading in Portuguese the question here, and I'm translating in English at the same time.
You're so talented. You are strong.
I know, right? No, I think, it's just, what is your view, your observation in terms of the spaces, in terms of African spirituality spaces within, for example, Santeria places, or by Brazilians or Cuban or Haitians? What is your observation on this? Is this growing? Is it not growing? Is it the same? Does it have any influence on the rest of the African American community?
That's an excellent question. I'm going to pin myself here so you're not looking at this logo, and then I'll have to remember to unpin myself. But that's an awesome question. So I'm actually a practitioner of African spirituality. You probably guessed. I am initiated into the Isheshe tradition, the indigenous indigenous spiritual belief system of the Yoruba in Nigeria, which is similar. It's the foundation of Santeria and Lukumi, but it's not the same. They're actually two separate worldviews, right? But I started in the Santeria system in the United States. And I think that we are so like Christianized. I want to say so many things. We're gonna have to talk about that one later, bruh. I mean, I'm just saying, but
no, that's good. That's good.
There are like small, you know, like there are small communities. We are not huge. Like they're in certain spaces, like New York, Miami, New York City, Miami. I'm trying to think of what other spaces. At Philadelphia, maybe, yeah. You're gonna find more like Santeria practitioners or Lukumi practitioners, right? So there's gonna be a sense of community. But for those of us who practice Isheshe, there are not as many spaces.
Are they being influential?
Our communities tend to be much smaller.
Are these spaces being very influential? I'm wondering, because for me, for example,
are they being
very influential in the rest of the communities? I wonder. What do you think? Because I'll tell you, while you think, I'll tell you a little story while you gather your thoughts.
Okay.
A few good years ago, I was going to Cuba quite a lot because I did a lot of Afro-Cuban dance. And at some point, I was kind of told, well, if you want to really know more, you need to be part of this more, as in sort of, you know, be part of the Santeria process and you know, make myself with all of that. And at that time, it's exactly what you just said. You said that we're so Christianized, and I felt like that. I was quite young. I was 20 something, you know, nearly 30s, but I was still, you know, in this process. And I was like, oh, I don't want to do that, because I still had that process in my head that, oh gosh, I can't do that. I can't go further than that. That's unknown territory, and that's scary. And I didn't, you know, because I had this so much in my head. And the only, you know, a couple of years later, I was like, why was I so scared? That's just silly, you know. But I want to, you know, I want to hear what your observations are.
Well, first of all, kudos to you for even, you know, taking the leap and saying, hey, I want to study Afro-Cuban dance. I'm going to Cuba. Like, it seems so logical, right? But Americans, I feel like Americans just don't travel as much as folks in Europe do, and like South America, you know, like I feel like we just, you know, any Americans that are listening to this, y'all can be mad at me. I don't care. Y'all can be mad. I'm still gonna have a good day. Okay, thank you. Yeah, we're very, you know, American centric. Like everything American is best. So, you know, like we just don't travel as much. So kudos to you for even saying, look, I want to study this thing. Let me go to the source. That's what pulled me. That's what keeps calling me back to the continent, you know. And I'm going to also say, I'm laughing because, like, you know, I'm a part of a community of practitioners that is, how do I say? We've all come through, most of us came through Lukumi before we got involved in Isheshe. And of course, it was dance that first exposed me to any kind of Lukumi, you know, African spirituality. So dance always just is like this repeat offender, you know, that like dictates our lives somehow. And we came through that, and we were also told that there were many things we could not access until we had gone through the rite of passage, you know, that would give us access, right? Whereas in Isheshe, which is the forefather of Lukumi, and Isheshe is what is actually practiced here in Africa, in Nigeria. There is, of course, there are things that you couldn't do, you know, certain things that you should not do unless you've done the certain rites of passage for your own protection or what have you. But there's very little that you don't get access to. You understand? If I wanted to, I mean, it's not saying that you get to learn everything, you know, like all the sacred dances of Obatala, all the sacred dances, all the dances of Shango. You know, it's not saying that you get to know everything without going through certain rites of passage that give you access to other things, right? But there is very little secretiveness. I think that's the point I'm trying to make. And I think that I have comments, I have opinions about it, but I'll save that for another conversation. But there's very little that's withheld. No, I'm gonna say what's on my mind. There's this sort of poverty consciousness that exists for people in the diaspora. I'm sorry, you know, I think y'all getting to know me a little bit. Like, yeah, things need to be said and need to be said. There's poverty consciousness that exists for those of us in the diaspora. If we're talking about African dance, African-derived spiritual traditions, we only know what little bit we know, you understand? We took it with us from Africa, or then we forgot it, then we had to relearn it, so we hold it like this. We say, you can't change this. No, you can't have this. No, you've got to jump through the hoops to get it. You know, it's pervasive. And it's actually quite nasty in the African dance scene. I've seen it, I've lived it, and it ain't about that life. It's horrible. I'm not saying it's happening everywhere, but that is a characteristic that we must change. We cannot continue that way, but it is poverty consciousness. We think that this is all we have. I'm not gonna get any more of that. But when we come to Africa and people are like, oh, you wanna learn? Oh, come to my house this weekend. Oh, you wasn't here yesterday. What happened to you? We were looking for you. Everybody was looking for you. I thought you said you wanted to learn. Come on, open your mind. You know, I'm gonna pour all my knowledge in there. Why? Because they're not scared that that's all that they know. It comes, you know, you understand, like the well is never gonna run dry. So yeah, that secretiveness that I can't do this unless I do that. I'm not saying that it doesn't always have a spiritual significance, but also keep in mind that there are spiritually effective and spiritually significant rituals that are impactful in our lives, and there are also symbolic rituals. There's a difference. A symbolic ritual is not going to provide me spiritual protection if I enter into this spiritual space. A symbolic ritual is just that, it's a symbol. And we have to learn to understand and see the difference between those things. But yeah, look, if anybody's mad, look, I still love you. I still love you, okay? But you need to know what you need to know. You need to know it's not right.
Thank you for saying that. I mean, I think, yes, there's a side to this aspect of things where it's very protective. It's very, you know, putting up barriers, but yes, it's protective because there's perhaps a rationale to that protectiveness, but at the same time, yes, the well is not going to run dry. And I'm so glad you said that, because very recently, a practitioner from the States, I don't know if you heard her name, Akosua Mokwa, and she kind of posted something about the fact that a lot of people, some teachers contact her to ask her and teach her to give them more steps. And she's kind of like, more steps, you know, like if you really know what you are doing, you're not going to run out of steps, you know, you're not going to run out of things to teach. You know, so it was very interesting that you kind of said that it links perfectly to this post by this practitioner as well that also lives in the States. So yeah, absolutely.
Good for her. Good on her.
I tend to agree with you on this one, but it's a tricky one, isn't it? But it is from I think from this poverty minded consciousness, I think. Do you think that this is another question that kind of put through? I'm not sure how it's kind of placed, but if you don't mind answering, I'm almost kind of heading towards the end. So I just want to make sure I don't miss the questions. It says, now more and more they teach kids, they teach children in schools how to meditate. And of course, there's a lot of classes around religious morals and stuff like that. Perhaps there should be more about ethics as well. But do you think that we ought to integrate these aspects of African spirituality in schools? I mean, it seems obvious, but perhaps is it not? Would it be a good thing to do? That's one of the questions.
Well, in the United States, there's supposed to be a very stark, a very hard distinction between spirituality and education. It's supposed to be that at least on the public school front, when it comes to our public school, kindergarten to 12th grade system, spirituality is in our country, spirituality is not supposed to have anything to do with that. There are private, institutions. There are African-centered institutions as well. They get to do what they want to do within certain parameters, right? So we've got Christian schools, we've got Catholic schools, we've got what do you call it? African-centered schools that have an African-centered curriculum, and in those spaces, we have the ability to incorporate a lot of those practices, from meditation or whatever people, decide they want to do. Some people are doing yoga for the kids, meditation, and these aren't African, derived, these aren't practices in terms of like African spirituality. But those people have those options to do that. I don't know how things work in Portugal, but I also think that when we have these kinds of structures that are restricting our ability to sort of augment the like educational curriculum with some moral teachings, right? And of course, if you're an Africanist, you're going to look to African teachings or African spirituality, right? Okay, this morality says, that according to this, or according to this story, I should be a good girl, right? Well, that story comes from an Anansi tale, from like Anansi the spider or what have you. For those of us who are looking to do that, unfortunately, we have to strip down the spiritual context and just take the moral teaching. At least in our culture, that's what we have to do. And I do know of some people that do that. I don't know, like I said, I don't know how that works in Portugal, but I've never let it stop me. Like, say for instance, when we teach, African dance classes, we do ballet at the end. And African dance classes, like I see you shaking your head, so like you're familiar with that. It does include touching the ground, which is a way of honoring our ancestors. That is a spiritual practice. I've never had anybody complain about it, but I'm going to do it. You know what I mean? So like, there are some places where, yeah, you'll get in trouble if you push too hard, but, like these are cultural forms, and I don't think we should have to like strip everything away from them in order to be accepted in the public sphere. I don't know what you guys think about that, but I know that's been my experience.
Well, absolutely. I mean, here in Lisbon, as I mentioned to you before, when we prepped this conversation, we are still developing these conversations around even integrating African dances in the curriculum and in schools, much less discuss African spirituality in schools. So perhaps a little bit far from that, but the idea is to bridge this knowledge into education, certainly, because of course, not just education as in dance education, but education as a formal education too. I'm actually going to pass the word on to our director, because I think it would be very, very interesting to link this conversation we're talking about in terms of how it is here, indeed, that you mentioned before, how it is in Lisbon and how it was in Lisbon, because Joselino is very directly linked with the research that is being done in Portugal and in Lisbon about the African presence. So I'm going to pass his word on to him, and perhaps he can share with us a little bit more about the spiritual practices in Lisbon as well, here now and in the past.
Yes,
Very good.
thank you. Well, it's similar to what you have been talking. Europe and Lisbon and Portugal were one of the first places where there was this contact with several African people. Some of them were from Islamic influence, already colonized by Islamic religion, like the Moors. But others came more intact in terms of their own spirituality. And from what we have seen and from what we know until now, there is this strong connection with the Brazilian spirituality, kind of candomblé, umbanda. We had like a very important doctor, Dr. Sousa Martins, and he was a renowned medicine doctor here in Portugal. He has his own statue here in Lisbon, and he was someone that was always dressing in all white. He was someone who was giving free medicine to the sick people, to the poor people. So he was a different guy. He was a spiritual guy, and he had this African connection. Even though he was a Portuguese person, he had this ancient African connection. So we see some of these repercussions, like in the sailors, the fishermen. Some of them still have like the cult to the sea, to the, it's different, it's not Yemanja, but it has that kind of influence. And we have it very a very thin connection. I've never encountered nothing stronger. That's why I was asking also to see the examples of the US, if like the migrant communities that are stronger, like the Haiti, Cuba, or Brazil, if it was growing the interest. Because here, since Portugal is a small country in terms of number of people, every time we have a migration from Brazil, there is a big impact in the society in all kind of areas, and on this area also. And it's very interesting to see this kind of a re-Africanization of some people. It's not very strong, but it would be something that we would be very interested in promote, because we already promote it through dancing and through other kind of works we do every day. A rehearsal, as you said, like touching the ground or dancing barefoot, is already, we already have that spiritual connection, but we don't know it in a structural way to teach it directly. We don't have that much information, and that should be something that maybe all the diasporas would agree on, and pass through several masters. Sometimes we have some masters from Conakry here that came here, and we always learn with them. And as you said, the well never dries. So each master has something to teach us, and that's and it's very unique. Our reality here in Lisbon, it's not the same as in Brazil or in the US or in Germany or England. Each place has its own rhythm and its own evolution, and it's very interesting to see it here as the first place in Europe that we have this connection between Europe and Africa. It's very interesting to see how things go. From what I see and from what I've read, that's most of my experience, Iris. So we, for example, in the rehearsals and some important shows that we do, we had some libation also in the backstage. Sometimes we do it, but I think we could improve this in a more stronger way. Recently, and one of the questions that was put here was from Eva from Porto, and she's a dancer that is also working a lot with Benin, and it's very interesting to see. It will be very interesting to see the reaction and the comprehension from what she will bring to Portugal directly from Benin, and the traditional dances, the voodoo, and it will be very interesting to see how everything goes. It's a world we have ahead to learn more things, and to reconnect our DNA to that memory that we have still here in the backup. So that's what I would say, Iris. I'm saying Iris, but it's Yiddish, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's healing. Like, you know, thank you so much for that, because, you know, it is, you said something that is very important. You know, you said that, you know, each of these places in the diaspora, you know, it has its own, like, we have our own history, we have our own development, you know, take, what do you call it? Oh, I had an example I wanted to mention. But even just looking at like the difference between, like in the United States, if you look at the history of Louisiana, you know, versus the rest of the South, you know, there were French, there were Spanish there in Louisiana, whereas the British were, you know, had a monopoly on, you know, the rest of the South. The religions that they brought with them, British coming from a Protestant background, whereas in Louisiana, the Spanish and the French were coming from a Catholic background. So in Louisiana, they were able to still worship and honor a lot of the deities that and the knowledge that they carried with them from West Africa was able to survive because they were able to worship, say for instance, Iyemada, you know, behind the Virgin Mary. They would appear to be praying to Virgin Mary, but in their hearts and minds, they were making supplications to Iyemada, you know, whereas the British had, what do you call it? I've been talking so long, the words are starting to just leave out of my head and run across the floor. But the British, they had a policy of assimilation. So, you know, enslaved Africans were not allowed to practice any of their African spiritual beliefs. And so even just like within one country, you can see the difference in the way those diasporic populations develop. So it was interesting to hear you talk about how things are in Portugal, and also very interesting to hear the way that you described like having these cultural forms, having access to these cultural forms, but then not having the sort of pedagogical structure in place to teach them. And so what I want to do is encourage you all, because I think that we can think about, especially when you're talking about like religious dance forms, those are not acquired in a dance class. They are acquired with your feet on the ground. You're part of the communities. You're at a bimbe, you're at some social event or ritual, you know, event or something, and people start doing a certain dance, and you, okay, this is what we doing? All right, so we're doing this now, y'all, okay. You know what I mean? And when you go again, you already know what to do, because that's what we were doing the last time. They start singing something, oh, that's what we sing? Okay, I'm watching somebody's mouth, and, you know, okay, so now I know the words, you know, like that's how we do it. I think that we can create those new models to pass on, to disseminate, you know, these cultural forms, especially those that come from a religious person. Like, it doesn't have to follow the, you know, Western studio-based model, because that's, I mean, it just doesn't. And I think that there's a little bit of friction between what those models require and the way that we learn these forms with our feet on the ground. So that's the work that we have ahead of us to do, you know. It's very interesting to hear you talk about that. And I want to just encourage you all to continue to think about how we can push back and challenge these sort of really westernized models for these forms that don't come from the West, you know? There's a space for that. And I think that's really like progressive, yeah.
And no, I completely agree. That was one of the things that I had to look at when I was doing my master's, is this idea that we don't have technique goes back to that. I mean, we have technique, but it hasn't been called technique. I mean, you're not going to tell me that you know, the drummers, they don't need to read 1, 2, 3, 4, or whatever. Their technique is to go pa, tiki, tiki, tapa, and then try to replicate that or whatever and into the drum, for example. So that is the technique, you know. But we are quite conditioned to think that that's not a technique, because it's not written down in the numbers or in a certain way, as you say, that is accepted in the West. So even a lot of, you know, drummers don't think themselves as having technique, because they didn't learn in a certain way that is consider a technique. So it's kind of crazy, kind of go around and around in the circles with this. So I'm going to give you one last question, because obviously I'm aware of time and your time as well, and it's quite it's a big one, but it's worth, you know, I know it's not going to end it here, and there's no definite answer to it, but we'd like to have a little bit of pick your brains on how can we then start to deconstruct this long colonial mindset in African dance practices. And oh, she's off, she's gone. Let's hope that she comes back again. We're almost finishing, so hopefully Dr. Omi is back. She's back, yay! You've made it back. I'm not sure if you heard this, you heard me again. I'm going to repeat the question again as well for everybody out there listening. That was our question of the evening for Dr. Omi Davis-Smith, who has been with us since 6 o'clock. I hope you are able to actually check this program on even on a later date. The question was about how can we start to deconstruct this colonial mindset in African dance practices, be it in dance education or in education and just in general, really. So I know it's a big question, but you know, if you can give us a little bit of a start, that would be great.
I'm going to, I popped off briefly. Oh, stupid Zoom, it kicked me off briefly, but I believe I understand what you're asking. This whole centuries-long colonial mindset when it comes to perceiving African dances, perceiving the Black body in dance, like how do we deconstruct that? How do we decolonize, right? And I think that even just having this conversation is a part of the work, you know, like I think we have to ask ourselves, I think the first question to ask ourselves is if we give a damn about these existing institutions that are bare, you know, that want to create roadblocks to our entry. I think we need to ask ourselves if it matters, you know, if that's what we want to do. I had to ask myself, when I came out of a strictly community-based practice into the academic practice, I was met with so much resistance, but I like to fight, huh? You tell me no, okay, move, watch me do it. You know, so the decision for me was it mattered. And I wanted to carve a place for myself here in academia. That being said, academia ain't what it's all about. And that's not the only place where, you know, where we can exist to have these kind of dance education. I think that like with what you guys are doing, creating our own spaces, I think there is huge empowerment in that. And I'm all about that. Can our own spaces at this point give us accreditation and hand a diploma to a student that she can then use to go get a job? Some can, some can't. But I think that like the first question is us asking if we even want to be a part of those spaces that don't want us there. And if we do, I think that the next step to consider is reclaiming and renaming, right? You'll notice that when I was speaking earlier, I kept, you know, at some point I said Black body, but most of the time I said melanated body of African descent, right? Like to be very specific, like reclaiming and renaming how we talk about who we are and what we do. I think there's a lot of room to push back on that. I think that also by creating our own, say for instance, pedagogical models, right? And like whatever we do, we have to insist and we have to push back, and it is tiresome and it is exhausting. But if those are the spaces that we want to inhabit, we're going to have to reclaim and rename for ourselves. I think that is, and I think that also like with what you guys are doing, having me here and having other speakers here, reaching hands across the waters and saying, hey sis, what's going on, bruh? Let's come on and do this thing together, you know, because, you know, yeah, we have different histories, but we all have, you know, we come from the same place, you know, and we really are on the same side. So that's just my little 2 cents on that. But I'm very, very happy for what you guys are doing, and I wish you all the best as you continue fighting the fight.
Thank you, Dr. Omi Davis-Smith. And do you want to tell us anything about? Do you have any? Talk about anything new, your current work, or anything that you'd like to tell people to come and see about your work, or at the moment you're in research, isn't it, as I understand? So it's going to be a little bit of time before.
The invitation. But yes, right now I am in the research process, and there is a beetle climbing up my curtains. Just thought you guys might want to know that.
So we better wrap up.
Welcome
We better
to
wrap
Africa.
up.
Yeah.
We better wrap up. Well, I just want to say good evening to everybody. I'm going to pass on the word to Giselino. These are the Afro-Atlantic sessions. Please check our page. Check Batote to Portugal page, and for the next guests. And I'll pass on the word to Giselino. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Well,
Thank
I don't
you so
have much more to say. This is our second attempt to abord this theme of the African spirituality. It's a theme that we think it has all the way to go. So you have a lot to do yet. And thank you for being with us from Conakry. Thank you for bringing your American experience. We all are connected, and we all felt what happened in these last 2 years, especially with the African American community. So have a good work there in Conakry also. And if you ever come to Lisbon, so you have to visit us, so we can speak a little bit and have some fun. And thank you all. That's it. Thank you to Fabio, that is also helping us in the backstage.
I'm here. So
yes.
thank you, Dr. Omi. Thank you for everything. Yeah, and keep doing your work. Thank you very much.
Okay. So bye to all.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you guys for
Have
having
a
me.
fantastic time. And good luck with everything. Take care.
Thank you so much. Y'all take care. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.